Imagine a world at its absolute zenith. The great empires of the Mediterranean, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Egyptians, were masters of trade, diplomacy, and monumental architecture. They were interconnected, wealthy, and seemingly invincible. But then, in the span of a single generation, the lights went out. Entire civilizations vanished, writing systems were forgotten, and the sophisticated world we once knew was replaced by a dark age of chaos. What happened to the world of 1200 BCE? For centuries, historians and archaeologists have searched for a single culprit. The primary suspect? A shadowy group known as the Sea Peoples. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions describe them as a terrifying confederation of seafaring marauders who descended upon the coasts like a plague. They were blamed for the sudden fall of kingdoms, appearing in the historical record as the ultimate agents of destruction. But was it truly a simple case of an invasion? Or are we looking at a much more complex puzzle? To understand the catastrophe, we must look at the timeline. The Late Bronze Age collapse wasn't a single event, but a period of cascading failures occurring between the late 13th and early 12th centuries BCE. Specifically, the year 1177 BCE stands as a haunting landmark. In this era of upheaval, this was a time when the interconnectedness that made these empires great became their greatest weakness. When one pillar fell, the entire roof of the ancient world began to cave in. The empires of this era were part of a sophisticated, globalized economy. They traded tin from distant lands to make bronze, the essential technology of the age. They exchanged luxury goods, shared diplomatic protocols, and relied on complex supply chains. This was the first true era of internationalism. However, this interdependence meant that a disruption in one region could trigger a domino effect across the entire Mediterranean basin. A crisis in the East could, and did, become a crisis in the West. But what if the enemy wasn't a fleet of ships, but the very sky above them? Modern science is beginning to reveal a terrifying truth that the ancient scribes could not have understood. Evidence suggests that a massive 150-year arid phase, a prolonged and devastating drought, gripped the region. This wasn't just a bad season. It was a generational shift in climate that fundamentally altered the landscape. The rains stopped, the rivers dwindled, and the lifeblood of these civilizations began to dry up. When the crops failed, the social contract began to unravel. In an era where the king's primary duty was to ensure divine favor and agricultural abundance, a prolonged drought was more than a natural disaster. It was a political crisis. Famine led to mass migrations as people fled their dying lands in search of food and water. These desperate movements of people likely contributed to the very invasions recorded by the Egyptians. The Sea Peoples may not have been a coordinated army, but a desperate wave of refugees seeking survival. As the hunger grew, so did the internal instability. The complex hierarchies of the Bronze Age were top-heavy and fragile. When the central authorities could no longer provide security or food, the peasantry and the lower classes began to revolt. We see evidence of internal uprisings and the sudden abandonment of palace centers. The very structures that managed the trade and the grain were being burned from within. The collapse was not just coming from the sea, but from the streets of the cities themselves. Adding to this chaos was the terrifying unpredictability of the Earth itself. Geological evidence suggests that seismic activity, or earthquake storms, may have struck the Mediterranean during this period. While a single earthquake rarely topples an empire, a series of massive tremors occurring during a time of famine and social unrest could be the final blow. Imagine a city already starving and under siege, suddenly struck by the very ground it stands on. It was a perfect storm of catastrophe. Let's look closer at the Sea Peoples themselves. Archaeological finds suggest they were not a monolithic group, but a diverse confederation of different cultures. Some may have been displaced Mycenaeans, others from the Aegean or even the Western Mediterranean. They were a symptom of the collapse, not just the cause. They were people caught in the gears of a dying system, forced to become marauders simply to find a place where life was still possible. They were the byproduct of a world in motion. The consequences were absolute. As these great powers fell, the very knowledge of how to run a civilization was lost. Writing systems like Linear B, used by the Mycenaeans to manage their complex bureaucracies, vanished entirely. The sophisticated trade networks that once spanned from Greece to Mesopotamia disintegrated into localized, subsistence-level economies. This wasn't just a change in leadership, it was a total systemic reset. The Bronze Age didn't just end, it was erased. When we piece these fragments together, the drought, the migrations, the trade collapses, and the seismic activity, a new picture emerges. It is no longer a story of a single war, but a story of a system's collapse. This is a phenomenon where multiple stressors hit a highly complex society simultaneously. The very complexity that allowed these empires to flourish became a trap. They were too specialized, too interconnected, and too rigid to survive a changing world. They were victims of their own success. This historical lesson feels hauntingly modern. We live in a world that is more interconnected, more technologically advanced, and more reliant on global supply chains than any civilization in history. We face our own versions of climate instability and resource scarcity. The collapse of the Bronze Age serves as a grim reminder that no matter how advanced a society becomes, it remains subject to the fundamental forces of nature and the fragile nature of human cooperation. The mystery of the Sea Peoples and the Bronze Age collapse continues to evolve as new archaeological techniques and DNA analysis provide fresh insights. We are moving away from the myth of the invader and toward an understanding of a world in a state of desperate, forced transition. The ruins of the Mediterranean are not just graves of empires, but lessons in the fragility of human achievement. They tell us that even the greatest heights can fall in a single generation. If you want to uncover more of history's greatest mysteries, make sure to subscribe to Epoch Unseen. Join us as we peel back the layers of time to reveal the truths that have been hidden for millennia. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a journey into the unseen. Thank you for watching.